Have you ever had that feeling that something is just off? Like a small, invisible shift in the air? Something you can't quite explain, but your body knows before your mind does? That was me, that night. Alone in a house that wasn't mine, in a neighborhood that was too quiet. I had been hired by an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, to take care of their house while they were traveling. It was a huge place, 3 stories, large windows, an overgrown backyard that stretched into the woods. They were kind people, and the job was easy. Keep the place tidy, bring in the mail, and make sure nothing looked abandoned. But something about that night felt different. I was in the living room watching TV with the lights dimmed when I first noticed it, the sound of an engine idling outside. At first I ignored it. Cars came and went all the time. But after a minute, I peeked through the curtain. A taxi had stopped right in front of the house. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, his face hidden under the shadow of the street lamp. He stood there for a moment, then walked straight into the yard. I frowned. Mr. Holloway? No, he wasn't supposed to be back for another week. But maybe plans had changed. Maybe he forgot to tell me. Still, something about the way the man moved unsettled me. There was no rush, no hesitation, just a slow, deliberate pace, like he had walked that path before. Then, without knocking, without turning toward the front door, he vanished behind the house. I waited. Maybe he had a key. Maybe he went in through the back door. But shouldn't I hear something? The rustling of a bag? A door closing? Nothing. The street outside was silent. The taxi had already driven away. I grabbed my phone, hesitating. Should I call Mr. Holloway? Ask if he had returned early. But what if I was overreacting? What if it was just a neighbor cutting through the yard? Minutes passed. The house stayed quiet. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing. I went back to the couch, but the feeling never left. That sense of something being off. And then, an hour later, I heard it again. The same car, the same engine, the same taxi stopping right outside. A shiver ran down my spine. I moved back to the window, my hands suddenly cold. The taxi door swung open. The same man stepped out. Again. My chest tightened. How? He moved exactly as before. Same slow steps, same direction, same eerie silence. And just like before, he disappeared behind the house. That's when I knew. Something was very, very wrong. I stayed by the window, watching. My heart was pounding. I knew what I had just seen, the same taxi, the same man, the same exact movements. But that didn't make sense. Had he left and come back? No, I had been here the whole time. I would have heard if he had walked through the house, opened a door, left footprints on the wooden floors. I reached for my phone. Maybe I should call someone, but who? The police? What would I even say? A guy walked into the backyard. Then an hour later, the same guy did it again. They would ask if he had done anything illegal. The answer? No. They would ask if I had actually seen him leave before. The answer? No. All I had was this deep, gut-wrenching feeling that something wasn't right. Then I noticed something else. The taxi was still there. The driver hadn't left this time. The car idled in the street, headlights on, like it was waiting. I squinted through the window, trying to see the driver's face. But the angle, the glare from the windshield, it was impossible. Then, the car door opened. For a split second, I thought the man was coming back out. But he didn't. The door swung shut again and the taxi pulled away, leaving me alone with whatever had just walked into the yard. I locked the front door. Something about this felt too wrong now. I moved through the house, checking the windows, making sure everything was shut. My hands were trembling. Calm down, I told myself. There's a logical explanation for this. But there wasn't. Because just as I reached the hallway leading to the back of the house, I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze, a slow, deliberate step. Then another. Someone was inside. I swallowed hard, my body locked in place. How? The doors were locked, the windows shut. The only way in would have been through the front, or the back. I turned toward the kitchen, toward the door that led to the backyard. Unlocked. My breath caught. No, I was sure I had locked it before. I was sure. Then another sound. A creak on the stairs. Whoever was inside was coming down. I stepped back. The stairs creaked again. Whoever was up there was moving slowly, as if they knew I was here, as if they were waiting for something. My mind raced. I had checked the entire house earlier. There was no one inside. And yet, somehow, there was now. I grabbed my phone, my fingers clumsy as I dialed the number for the taxi company. A woman answered. City Cab Services. How can I help you? I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hey, I need to ask about a ride. There was a taxi that stopped at my address twice tonight. I need to know if it was the same driver. A pause. Typing sounds. Then her voice came back, careful. Sir, there was only one ride dispatched to that address tonight. My stomach dropped. Are you sure? More typing. Yes, sir. It was a one-way trip about an hour ago. The passenger never called for a second ride. My mouth went dry. A one-way trip. The passenger never left. So how did he get back into the taxi the second time? Unless he never did. I lowered the phone slowly. My ears were ringing. Then, a soft knock on the hallway wall. Not the stairs. The hallway. He was closer now. I ran, straight into the kitchen, grabbing the biggest knife I could find. Another knock. Louder. I couldn't breathe. I turned slowly, heart hammering, forcing myself to look into the dark hallway. And that's when I saw him, standing at the edge of the shadows, the same man from the taxi. He was still too still, like a mannequin placed there by mistake. His head tilted, eyes locked onto me, unblinking. But the worst part? His mouth was moving, not speaking, just moving. Like he was whispering something, but no sound came out. My body screamed at me to run, but I was frozen. Then he took a step forward. I bolted. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock, yanking at it. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, footsteps, fast, closer. I threw myself against the door. Nothing. Then a breath right behind my ear. A whisper. You opened the door for me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The whisper was right there, brushing against my ear like cold wind. My entire body was locked in place, but my instincts screamed, move. With everything I had, I twisted the lock again. It gave way. The door burst open, and I stumbled onto the porch, slamming the door shut behind me. My chest heaved. I wasn't safe yet. I needed to get away from the house. Now. Then I saw it. The taxi, parked across the street, engine still running. But something was off. The driver, he was gone. The car was empty. That's when I noticed the back door was wide open, like it was waiting for someone. Like it had been waiting all along. A cold realization crept up my spine. This whole time, the man had never really left the taxi. So what had I let into the house? I ran, straight down the street, as far away as I could get. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station. When I finally called the police, I could barely explain what had happened. A break-in? A stranger inside the house? The officers arrived and searched the place. Nothing. No forced entry. No signs of anyone inside. Just me. Standing there trying to convince myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Then, as they were leaving, one of the officers hesitated. Hey, he said, glancing toward the open back door of the taxi. Did you notice that? I followed his gaze. Inside the car, lying on the back seat, was a jacket. A dark one, just like the man had been wearing, and sticking out from the pocket, a taxi receipt. The timestamp? From over a week ago. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't stay another night. All I knew was this: that passenger was never supposed to leave the car, and I had let him inside. I needed extra money. Badly. So when I saw a job posting to house sit a mansion for a wealthy family, I jumped at the chance. The pay was ridiculous for what seemed like an easy gig. Just stay in the house, water the plants, and keep an eye on things while the owners were away. The place was enormous, a modern structure with sleek glass walls and a minimalist design. It felt more like a luxury hotel than a home. When I arrived, the owner, Mr. Holloway, greeted me with a warm but distracted smile. He showed me around briefly, but the highlight was the security system. Cameras in every room, he said, tapping his phone. I can check them anytime, and so can you, just in case. That last part made me pause. Just in case? Has anything ever happened before? I asked. He shook his head. Not really, but, peace of mind. I nodded, though something in his tone made me uneasy. I brushed it off. It was probably just a precaution. Rich people were always extra careful with their properties. As he left, I stood in the middle of the massive living room, taking in the silence. It was too quiet. The first night started out normal. I locked up, made some tea, and curled up on the couch with a book. By midnight, I was dozing off, enjoying the easy paycheck. Then, at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Living room. I froze. The only other living thing here was a plant. Heart pounding, I opened the security app. The camera feed loaded and I held my breath. The living room was empty. I exhaled, shaking my head. Probably a glitch. Maybe the system picked up shifting shadows or a flicker from outside lights. Still, I checked the locks again before heading upstairs to sleep. But deep down, something felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that the motion alert had been nothing. A glitch. A false reading. Technology messes up all the time, right? Still, I couldn't ignore the unease that settled in my chest. Just to be sure, I spent the day checking every room, closets, under beds, even the massive pantry in the kitchen. Nothing. By nightfall, I was exhausted. I double-checked every lock and window before heading upstairs. I even placed a chair under the front door handle, like I used to do as a kid when I was scared of monsters. I fell asleep faster than I expected. Then my phone buzzed again. I jolted awake, my body already tense. 3:12 a.m. Motion detected, upstairs hallway. My breath caught in my throat. Upstairs, where I was. I hesitated, fingers trembling as I opened the app. The hallway was empty. I scanned the feed, my pulse pounding. Was the system broken, or worse? Was someone inside the house, slipping out of view just in time? I wanted to check, but fear pinned me to the bed. Instead, I stayed awake until the sun came up, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Not yet. That night, I almost packed my bags and left. But the logical part of my brain argued against it. I had no proof that anything was actually wrong. It was just some weird security system bugs, right? I forced myself to stay. Bad decision. At 3:42 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. Motion detected, living room. Motion detected, kitchen. Motion detected, upstairs hallway. My stomach twisted into knots. I hesitated before tapping the camera feed, and then I saw him. A tall figure standing in the middle of the dark living room. He was completely still, his face just out of view, hidden by shadows. But he was watching the camera. Watching me. A cold, paralyzing dread spread through my body. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. No alarms had gone off. How did he get in? I swallowed hard and blinked, and in that split second the feed glitched. For just a moment his face flickered into view, blurred, unnatural, like a bad signal trying to form a picture that shouldn't exist. And then the feed cut to black. I sat frozen, my phone clenched in my shaking hands. My brain struggled to process what I had just seen. Who was he? How did he get in? Was he still inside? I forced myself to breathe. I needed to move. I needed to leave. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy bedside lamp, before inching toward my bedroom door. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out every other sound. I slowly cracked the door open and peered into the hallway. Empty. Step by step, I crept forward, my bare feet making no sound against the cold floor. The house was silent. Too silent. Reaching the staircase, I hesitated before looking down. The living room was dark. Shadows stretched across the walls. The man was gone. I clenched my jaw. No. I wasn't imagining this. He had been there. I gripped my phone and opened the security app again. The feed was back, but every recorded clip from the last hour was gone. Deleted. And then, buzz. My breath caught. Another notification. Motion detected upstairs hallway. My stomach dropped. I was in the hallway, and I wasn't moving. I turned, pulse hammering in my ears. The hallway was still empty, but I felt it. That suffocating sensation of being watched. With shaking hands, I refreshed the camera feed. A new image loaded. My blood turned to ice. He was standing at the bottom of the staircase now. Closer. The camera glitched again, distorting his figure, like something was trying to force its way into reality. And then, his head tilted. Not like a normal person tilting their head. It snapped to the side. Unnatural, jerky, wrong. The app crashed. A whisper of static filled the air, like an old TV struggling to hold a signal. That was enough. I ran. Bolted into the nearest room, slammed the door and locked it. My back pressed against the cold wood, lungs burning. Then something scraped against the other side. A long, slow dragging sound. It stopped. Then, knock, 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 soft, deliberate. I gripped my phone, frantically dialing the only person who might believe me, Mr. Holloway. He picked up immediately. "Get out of the house," he whispered. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and sprinted for the door. As I reached the hallway, my phone buzzed one last time. Motion detected, upstairs hallway. I stopped. The air around me felt heavy, thick, like stepping into a space that wasn't meant for me. I turned my head. He was there, at the top of the stairs. Close enough now that I could see his face. It wasn't a face at all. It was blurred, shifting, like my brain was rejecting what it was seeing. A smear of something human that shouldn't exist. The lights flickered. The walls seemed to close in. My ears rang with static, and then the screen door slammed open behind me. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted outside into the cold night air, my lungs burning. My car was parked just a few feet away, but I didn't dare look back. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. As I pulled away, I glanced at the mansion one last time. Through the second-floor window, standing in complete darkness, he was still watching me. I never went back. Mr. Holloway called me hours later. His voice was different, quiet, shaken. "I checked the old footage," he said. "That man, he's been showing up in the recordings for weeks, even before you got there." My blood ran cold. "So, who was he?" I whispered. A long pause. Then, "I don't know." Silence. Then he added something that made my stomach drop. "We never installed cameras in the living room." I needed the money. That's the only reason I agreed to it. A friend of mine had told me about a house-sitting gig. Easy cash. Just watching over an old farmhouse while the owners were away for a couple of weeks. I had no experience, but they weren't asking for much. Lock the doors at night, water the plants, and make sure no one broke in. Sounded simple enough. When I arrived, the house had that eerie stillness that only isolated places seem to have. It sat on a large piece of land surrounded by nothing but rolling hills and clusters of trees. The owners were an older couple, nice enough. But there was something off about the way they handed me the keys, like they wanted to say something but decided against it. Before leaving, the husband, Mr. Reynolds, gave me one last look. "You'll be fine," he said, a little too forcefully. That should have been my first warning. The first night was uneventful. The wind howled outside, the wood creaked under its own weight, but that was normal. At least that's what I told myself. The second night, though, I saw him. I was about to close the bedroom curtains when my eyes caught movement outside. At first I thought it was just a trick of the shadows, but then I saw it. A man, standing on one of the thick branches of the large tree in the front yard. He was completely still. Too still. I stood frozen, staring. My mind raced for an explanation. Maybe a homeless guy, a hunter, someone passing through. But who the hell climbs a tree and just stands there? I shut the curtains and locked the door. My heart was hammering in my chest. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I barely slept that night. Every small noise made me jolt awake, my ears straining for any sound outside. But the house remained silent. Too silent. The next evening, I told myself I wouldn't look outside. If I didn't see him, he wasn't there. Simple. But I couldn't help it. As I reached to close the curtains, my eyes flicked to the tree. He was still there. Same spot. Same stiff posture. Only something was different. He was closer. The night before, he had been standing near the middle of the tree. Now he was 2 branches lower. His face was shadowed, but I swore I could feel his eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward him. The light reflected off something wet. His eyes. They gleamed in the darkness, unblinking, like they weren't just reflecting the light, but absorbing it. A sharp chill ran down my spine. My hands shook as I slammed the curtain shut. I locked every door and window in the house. I told myself it was paranoia, that I'd wake up in the morning and laugh at how ridiculous I was being. But I didn't sleep that night either. The 4th night, I'd had enough. I called the police. My voice was steady, but my fingers were shaking. "There's a man outside my house. He's been standing in a tree for the past 2 nights. I think he's getting closer." The dispatcher didn't hesitate. "We're sending someone now." 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. Their headlights cut through the darkness as they stepped onto the porch. I was relieved, until I saw their faces when they looked at the tree. It was empty. The man was gone. I felt my stomach drop. "He was right there," I insisted, pointing at the branch. "He's been there every night." One officer scanned the area with a flashlight while the other crouched down, inspecting the ground. After a moment, he stood up and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "There are no footprints." My mouth went dry. "What?" He gestured to the dirt beneath the tree. If someone had been climbing up and down, there would be footprints. But there's nothing. Not even broken twigs. A heavy silence filled the air. The officer met my eyes. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't answer the officer's question. Because what could I say? That I was seeing things? That maybe I was losing my mind? They left soon after, telling me to call again if anything changes. But as I watched their car disappear down the long dirt road, I felt more alone than ever. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that maybe the man, whoever he was, had left for good. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't look. I closed every curtain, locked every door, and tried to focus on the TV. But when the power flickered, just for a second, something inside me cracked. I had to check. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled the curtain back just an inch. He wasn't in the tree. My stomach twisted. I scanned the yard, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then I saw him, standing on the porch, right outside the front door. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. He was too close, too still. He hadn't just climbed down. He had moved without making a sound. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb. As I dialed 911, I turned back to the window. He was gone. I couldn't stay, not after that. I threw my things into my bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it up. I didn't care about the job anymore. I didn't care about the money. I just needed to get out. But as I turned toward the door, I hesitated. A final horrible thought crossed my mind. I forced myself to look at the tree one last time, and there he was, back on the branch, exactly where he had been before. But now I saw something I hadn't noticed before, something that made my blood turn to ice. A rope. It hung around his neck, swaying slightly in the wind. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing. Then my phone rang. The sudden noise made me jump, and I nearly dropped it. With trembling hands, I answered. It was Mr. Reynolds. His voice was calm. Too calm. So, you saw him? A heavy pause. He's always there, he said finally. We just learned to stop looking. The call cut off, and I ran. Not everyone makes it to the end of the story, Redam. But if you did, you should subscribe. Consider it your lucky charm. Have you ever agreed to something so simple only to regret it later? That's how I feel right now, sitting alone in Mark's living room, questioning every decision that led me here. It was supposed to be easy. Stay at his place for a few nights while he was away, water his plants, feed his cat. That's it. I almost said no. Mark lives in an old house, tucked in a quiet neighborhood. Too quiet, but he promised me free food and full access to his movie collection, so I figured, why not? Before leaving, he gave me a brief tour. Kitchen, living room, bathroom, standard stuff. Then he paused in the hallway and pointed at a door at the end. That's the guest room, he said, his tone oddly serious. If it opens, just ignore it. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. What do you mean? He shrugged. Sometimes it doesn't stay shut, but don't worry about it. I thought he was messing with me, but something about his face told me otherwise. Now sitting here, his words keep echoing in my head. If it opens, just ignore it. That night, after getting comfortable, I walked down the hall to turn off the lights. That's when I noticed it, the guest room door. Slightly open. I frowned. I could have sworn it was closed earlier. Maybe Mark hadn't shut it all the way. Shrugging it off, I pushed it closed and went to bed. But a few hours later, when I got up for water, I stopped cold. The door was open again. This time, my stomach tightened. I knew I had shut it. I walked over, hesitated for a second, then closed it, hard, just in case. A few steps away, I turned back. It was open, not slowly, not dramatically, just open. My breath hitched. The house was dead silent, but something felt wrong. I pushed the door shut once more, pressing my palm against the wood, making sure I heard the click. As I turned away, a soft creak from inside the room. I stood frozen in the hallway, my pulse pounding in my ears. That noise, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it, came from inside the guest room. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was the house settling. But then, why did it sound like movement? I forced myself to breathe, gripping the doorknob. I wasn't going to let some creaking wood freak me out. With a quick motion, I yanked the door open. Nothing. The room was empty, just a neatly made bed, a wooden dresser, and a dusty nightstand. No windows were open, no sign of anything unusual. Still, I felt uneasy. My skin prickled like I was being watched. Backing away, I shut the door again, this time making sure it latched. Then, for good measure, I pressed my palm against it for a few extra seconds. Silence. I exhaled sharply. It's just an old door, I muttered to myself. But as I walked away, I swore I heard a whisper, too soft to understand but too clear to ignore. By the time I got to bed, my nerves were shot. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. I needed proof. If this door was moving on its own, I wanted to see it. Grabbing my phone, I set it up on a chair facing the guest room door. I hit record and left the screen glowing in the dark. Satisfied, I climbed into bed and tried to sleep. Every little noise kept me on edge. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the fridge, the distant creaks of the house. Eventually, exhaustion won. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. For a moment, I forgot about the door. Then I saw my phone still sitting where I left it. My stomach twisted. I reached for it, hesitated, then pressed play. At first, nothing. Just a still image of the door. Minutes passed. Then, movement. The door handle twitched. The door began to inch open. My breath caught. No way. Then a shadow moved inside the room. I clutched the phone tighter. The shadow shifted closer, until I saw them. 2 eyes, staring directly at the camera. And then, the video cut off. I dropped my phone. My hands were shaking. I played the video again. The door, the slow movement, the shadow, the eyes. The footage cut off so suddenly. Not like the battery died. Not like the storage was full. It stopped as if someone had pressed the button. A chill ran down my spine. I forced myself to look at the guest room door. It was shut, exactly how I left it. But I knew better now. Someone had been in there. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind ran through 100 explanations. An intruder? But the house was locked. A prank? But Mark wouldn't. I had to know. My legs felt like lead as I approached the door. Every step made my stomach twist. I reached out, gripped the handle, and slowly turned it. The door swung open. Empty. Nothing out of place. The bed untouched. No footprints. But something was missing. My charger. I had left it on the nightstand last night. I was sure. And now it was gone. I grabbed my phone and called Mark. 1 ring, 2, 3. Voicemail. I texted him instead. Who the hell was in your house? No answer. My body was tense. I felt exposed, like someone was watching me. I checked the front door. Locked. The windows. Locked. I paced the living room, phone in hand, staring at the screen. Nothing. I tried calling again. This time it rang once and then went straight to voicemail. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed another message. Mark, I'm serious. I caught something on camera. I need to know what's going on. I hit send. A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared. Then they vanished. Then they appeared again. My heart pounded. Finally, his reply came. If you saw him, it's already too late. I stared at the message, my blood turning ice cold. Then, a soft creak behind me. I turned. The guest room door was open. I couldn't move. The guest room door was wide open, but this time I knew. I hadn't touched it. My phone slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. My heartbeat was deafening in my ears, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but I couldn't turn my back. Slowly, I stepped forward. The room was dark, the curtains drawn even though I hadn't touched them. The air was stale, heavy, like something had been sitting in there for years. I swallowed hard and reached for the light switch. Click. Nothing. My fingers trembled as I lifted my phone, using the screen's glow to cut through the darkness. And then, footprints. Faint, but there, in the dust covering the wooden floor, leading from the nightstand. to the door, to me. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. Then, the floor creaked. Not behind me, not across the room. Right next to me, a whisper of movement, a shift in the air. I turned my phone's light. Nothing, but something was here. I could feel it. I bolted. I didn't care about packing, didn't care about looking back. I ran. Out the front door, down the street, not stopping until I reached my car. My hands fumbled with the keys. My lungs burned. I got inside, locked the doors, and stared at the house. From the outside, it looked normal, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. My phone vibrated in my lap. A new text from Mark. "Did you take anything from the house?" I blinked, confusion cutting through my panic. I texted back, fingers shaking. "No. Why?" A pause. Then, "Check your pockets." My stomach twisted. Slowly, I reached into my hoodie pocket. Fingers brushed against something small, cold. I pulled it out. My charger. Except, it wasn't mine. The plastic was old. The cord frayed. The brand logo, unfamiliar. I dropped it like it burned me. Then another text. "You need to bring it back." Now, I stared at the message, then at the house, and as I did, the front door, which I knew I had slammed shut, swung open.